4,500 years ago, before most people had ever seen a paved street, a city rose with straight roads, careful drainage, baked brick houses, public wells, and a kind of order that feels strangely modern. Yet what makes it unsettling is not only what they built, it is what seems to be missing. No obvious palace, no clear king, no giant monument telling us who commanded it. A city can survive in ruins, but its reasons can disappear. So what was this city, and why was it too advanced to explain easily? Imagine walking into a city that should feel impossibly distant, a city buried under 4,500 years of dust, heat, river silt and silence. You may expect rough walls, crooked lanes, huts gathered without order, and people living close to the edge of survival. That is how the deep past often appears in the mind, as if everything before written memory must have been simple, fragile, and unfinished. But the first strange thing about this city is that it does not greet you with chaos. It greets you with lines. The streets run with steady confidence, crossing one another as if someone had imagined movement before the feet arrived. The houses are built from baked bricks, not random stones pulled from the ground, but bricks shaped again and again to a repeated pattern. There are doorways, courtyards, stairways, rooms around private spaces, and walls that suggest not a temporary camp, but a long agreement between human hands and the place they chose to inhabit. Beneath the quiet surfaces, another city seems to exist, a hidden city of channels, drains, wells, bathing places, and water routes. It is not the kind of greatness that rises into the sky. If we need to make it is the kind that runs under the floor, behind a wall, along the edge of a street, where daily life depends on things most people never look at for long. To understand why this feels so difficult to explain, it helps to begin much earlier, with the older human world. For most of our species' story, human beings move through landscapes in small groups, carrying little, following water, animals, seasons, and memory. A path was made by repeated walking. A shelter was repaired by the people who slept inside it. Waste returned to the earth by distance and weather. Water was found, guarded, shared, and sometimes lost. The human body was shaped for motion, attention, hunger, heat, cold, and the nearness of other people. Then, slowly and unevenly, some humans began living in larger settlements, closer to fields, rivers, animals, stored grain, and strangers. That change did not simply create more houses. It created new problems that the older wandering life had rarely asked in the same way. Where does dirty water go when many people live close together? How do hundreds, then thousands, move without turning every path into confusion? How does a wall, a brick, a doorway, a drain, or a well become predictable enough that people can build upon the work of others who may never meet them? In this city, those questions seem to have been answered not by one dramatic monument, but by the patient arrangement of ordinary life. A person could step out of a house and meet a street that was not accidental. Someone could draw water from a well placed where many lives could reach it. A household could wash, drain, cook, sleep, store, repair, and return again to the same rooms. The city was not merely a cluster of people. It was a machine of habits made from clay, water, fire, and repeated trust. That is what makes the first encounter so unsettling. The ruins do not only show that ancient people were clever, that would be too easy, and too small. They suggest that, long before many later cities struggled with filth and broken water systems, people here had learned to make urban life feel almost calm. They built with enough consistency that the individual builder disappears and a larger pattern remains. They left behind no living voice to explain why the roads took this shape, why the bricks followed their measures, why water was treated with such care, or why the city seemed to place human daily life at its centre. Standing there in thought, among silent streets and baked walls, the distance between them and us becomes less simple. They are ancient, yet not primitive. They are gone, yet their order remains visible. The longer we look, the more the question grows. What kind of society could make a city so organized, so practical, and so strangely familiar, so early in the human story? If the city had greeted us with a towering monument, the mystery might have felt easier. Human beings have become accustomed to reading the past through displays of power. A giant pyramid suggests a ruler. A royal tomb suggests a dynasty. A palace suggests a center from which commands once traveled outward. Across much of ancient history, authority often leaves visible footprints. Stone remembers kings, walls remember armies, temples remember gods. Yet as we continue walking through this city in our imagination, something unusual begins to emerge. The things that seem most important are not the things we expect to find at the center of an ancient civilization. The streets continue, the houses continue, wells appear again and again. Drains follow their routes with quiet persistence. The city seems deeply organized, yet the source of that organization remains difficult to point toward. This is where the puzzle becomes larger than architecture. A city is not only a collection of buildings, it is a collection of agreements. Every person who builds a wall, repairs a roof, clears a drain, draws water, stores grain, or follows a street participates in a system larger than themselves. The greater the population becomes, the harder such coordination usually is. For most of human existence, people lived in groups small enough to know one another personally. Trust often came from familiarity. Rules could be remembered through direct relationships, but once settlements expanded, another challenge appeared. Human beings had to cooperate with increasing numbers of people they did not know. A city required more than physical structures. It required invisible structures inside the mind. Long before modern governments, modern engineering, or modern institutions, ancient communities had to find ways to create predictability. A stranger needed to know where water could be found. A family needed confidence that a street would remain usable. A builder needed confidence that materials would follow familiar measurements. Without such expectations, urban life becomes unstable. Looking at this city today, archaeologists can see evidence of repeated patterns. Similar brick proportions appear across large areas. Streets follow recognizable layouts. Building practices show surprising consistency. These details may seem ordinary at first glance, yet they point towards something profound. They suggest that many people were participating in shared habits that lasted across time. To understand why this matters, it helps to remember where humans began. Our species evolved in environments where survival depended on flexibility. Small bands could move when resources changed. Shelters could be abandoned and rebuilt. A trail could disappear after a season. In such worlds, permanence was often limited. The landscape itself remained the largest organizing force. Here, however, human beings appear to have created an environment that organized itself through accumulated decisions. A child born into the city may have grown up expecting certain things to exist before ever understanding who created them. The street was already there. The well was already there. The drainage channel was already there. The city had begun shaping the behavior of its inhabitants just as much as its inhabitants shaped the city. That transformation marks one of the deepest changes in human history. At some point, people stopped merely adapting to their surroundings and began constructing surroundings that guided future generations. The bricks beneath one person's feet carried the intentions of people long gone. Daily routines became linked to systems larger than any individual memory. What makes this especially intriguing is that the city seems to have achieved this without loudly advertising the mechanisms behind it. We do not immediately encounter enormous statues declaring who controlled everything. We do not find obvious monuments dominating every view. Instead, the evidence of organization appears distributed throughout ordinary spaces. It is present in the repetition of practical solutions rather than dramatic displays. The city almost seems to whisper its sophistication instead of announcing it. As evening settles over this imagined walk, another thought begins to form. Perhaps the most advanced thing about the city was not any single building at all. Perhaps it was the ability of thousands of people to participate in a shared order so thoroughly that the order itself became nearly invisible. And if that was true, then the greatest achievement of this ancient place may not have been what it built above the ground, but the social understanding that allowed those structures to exist for generations without constant visible reminders of power. The more carefully we look at the city, the more its strangeness moves from the spectacular to the ordinary. This is not a place that asks us to stare upward at a single impossible object. It asks us to look down, along the street, into a drain, across the wall of a house, toward a well that may have served many hands over many years. That shift matters. Modern people often measure ancient achievement by what still overwhelms the eye. We understand height, weight, and size quickly. A huge stone temple makes power easy to imagine. A royal tomb makes hierarchy easy to name. But an orderly street, a brick ratio, a covered drain, or a carefully placed bathing space asks for a different kind of attention. It asks us to imagine the slow discipline of daily life. It asks us to see planning not as a single command, but as a pattern repeated so often that it becomes part of the ground itself. For early humans, this would have been a profound departure from older ways of living. In a small mobile group, the environment was open and changeable. People carried knowledge in their bodies, where to walk, when to rest, how to read clouds, how to follow animals, how to remember water. The world was not fixed by walls. It was held together by movement, memory, kinship, and shared danger. A settlement of this scale changed the center of human experience. The body no longer moved through open land in quite the same way. It moved through lanes, thresholds, courtyards, roofs, and rooms. The hand no longer shaped only a temporary shelter or a tool for the day. It shaped materials that another generation might inherit. The eye no longer watched only the horizon for weather or animals. It also watched the human-made order of streets, neighbours, storage spaces, water channels, and walls. This is why the city feels too advanced to explain easily. Not because ancient people were supposed to be incapable. That idea would be false and unfair. Human intelligence was already ancient long before bricks were fired in kilns. The deeper puzzle is how intelligence became organised across so many separate lives. A single clever person can solve a problem for one household. A skilled builder can shape one strong wall. A careful family can keep one courtyard clean. But a city requires solutions that survive beyond one person's attention. It requires enough shared behaviour that the same practical logic appears again and again, from one street to another, from one house to another, from one generation to the next. That is a different kind of achievement. It is not only mental, it is social. It is physical, it is environmental. It is the slow conversion of human cooperation into brick, water, and space. When we imagine people waking there in the morning, we should not imagine them as symbols of mystery, frozen in a strange ancient world. They were bodies with thirst, fatigue, hunger, illness, family duties, habits, and small worries. They needed water close enough to carry. They needed waste to leave the living space. They needed walls that could stand through heat, dampness, and time. They needed streets that made movement possible. Every ordinary need pressed against the shape of the city. Every repeated answer became part of its design. In that sense, the advanced quality of the city may have grown from something very basic, the ancient human need to make life less exposed. The same species that once slept under branches, beside fires, inside caves, or near temporary shelters, had begun creating a place where survival was softened by arrangement. The city did not remove danger. No ancient city could. Floods, disease, hunger, conflict, and slow environmental change still belong to the world. But within its walls and streets, one can sense an attempt to reduce uncertainty. Water had a place. Movement had a place. Houses had a place. The body had a place. That may be why these ruins are so haunting. They show a people far from us in time, yet close to us in need. They did not leave a simple explanation carved in a language we can fully hear. They left something quieter. A city where ordinary life seems to have been thought about, with unusual care. And before we ask who ruled it, or why it faded, or what its people believed, we have to pause with this first fact. 4,500 years ago, human beings built a city whose most unsettling achievement was not that it looked ancient, but that parts of it still feel calmly, stubbornly, almost impossibly human. There is a familiar way to enter the ancient world. We look for the highest place, the largest building, the richest grave, the carved name, the face of a ruler, the stone body of a god. These things help the mind settle. They give power a shape. They allow a lost society to become easier to tell. In Egypt, a pyramid can make authority visible even before we understand the person buried within it. In Mesopotamia, a temple platform can lift sacred and political life above the flat plain. In many old cities, power climbs upward or gathers at the center, asking to be seen. But this city resists that habit of looking. It does not easily hand us one great figure standing above the rest. It does not clearly arrange itself around a palace that explains who commanded the streets, who ordered the bricks, who controlled the water, or who gathered labor from thousands of people. The absence is not empty. It is active. It forces the question to become more difficult. How can a city feel so organized when the usual symbols of command are so hard to find? That is where the mystery deepens. If we only asked whether ancient people could build well, the answer would be simple. Of course they could. Human beings had been solving physical problems for a very long time before this city appeared. They had crossed landscapes, shaped tools, followed rivers, learned fire, remembered seasons, raised children under difficult conditions, and carried knowledge from one generation to another. The human mind was never primitive in the way modern imagination sometimes suggests. But a city is not only a problem of clever hands, it is a problem of coordination. Thousands of bodies wake, move, drink, eat, wash, work, repair, and sleep within the same dense space. Every day, the smallest needs of the body become public questions. Where water comes from, where water goes, where a pathway remains open, where a wall can stand, where one household ends and another begins. In many ancient societies, the answer seems to point back toward visible authority. A ruler organizes labor. A priesthood guards sacred order. A palace stores goods and commands people. A monument tells the population where power lives. Yet here, the city seems to give us order, without giving us an obvious face of order. That does not mean there was no leadership, no hierarchy, no ritual, or no inequality. It would be careless to turn absence into certainty. Archaeology often preserves stone, brick, bone, and soil better than voice, law, rank, or memory. A wooden structure may vanish. A political role may leave no statue. A sacred place may not look sacred to later eyes. Still, the pattern remains unusual. The city's most persuasive evidence is not a throne room. It is repetition. It is the repeated brick, the repeated street logic, the repeated attention to water, the repeated effort to make daily life function. This kind of evidence asks us to imagine power differently. Perhaps authority did exist, but did not express itself through giant personal monuments. Perhaps social order was spread through councils, merchant groups, ritual obligations, neighborhood rules, inherited craft standards, or systems we cannot name because their words have disappeared. Perhaps the people who lived here understood public life in a way that does not fit neatly into the stories later civilizations left behind. For the listener drifting through these ruins in thought, this is more unsettling than a palace would be. A palace would let us point and say, "There, that is where the city came from." A royal tomb would let us imagine a person at the center. But this city makes the center harder to see. Its intelligence appears distributed, almost hidden inside the ordinary fabric of life. It is as if the city's deepest command was not shouted from a tower, but repeated silently in the way bricks were made. Drains were cleared, walls were aligned, and water was brought close to the body. The ancient human beginning still echoes beneath this. Our species first learned cooperation face to face, around fires, in camps, along paths, within small groups where memory and relationship held people together. Here, that old cooperation had been stretched into an urban form. Trust no longer lived only in the eyes of familiar people. It lived in standards, habits, spaces, and systems that could outlast a single human life. That may be why the missing palace matters so much. It does not make the city less advanced. It makes the advancement harder to explain. The ruins seem to ask whether civilization always needs a visible master, or whether human beings once built a different kind of order, one whose leaders, rules, and meanings have faded more completely than its bricks. The absence of a clear king does not make the city simple. It makes it more difficult to understand. When a civilization leaves behind a ruler's name, the mind has something to hold. A name can become a handle for the whole society, even if that handle is incomplete. We can say that a monument was ordered by someone, that a tomb belonged to someone, that a victory was claimed by someone, that a law was written under someone's authority. But this city does not offer that kind of comfort easily. It leaves us with streets, brickwork, drains, wells, platforms, rooms, seals, and traces of repeated life, yet not a single voice that clearly says, "I ruled this place." That silence changes the way we listen to the ruins. It makes every practical object feel heavier. A drain is no longer only a drain. A well is no longer only a well. A brick is no longer only a brick. Each one becomes a sign of coordination without a visible commander. This is the cold part of the puzzle. A city cannot keep itself organized by accident for long. Dense human life creates pressure every day. Water must be shared, waste must be removed, houses must be repaired, streets must remain passable, materials must be shaped and transported, disputes must be settled, boundaries must be respected. If none of these things happen, a city slowly turns against the bodies living inside it. The same closeness that gives people trade, protection, memory, and shared labor can also produce disease, conflict, crowding, and confusion. Urban life is a kind of test placed upon the human animal. It asks whether a species shaped in smaller groups can live among many strangers without being swallowed by its own disorder. In this city, the answer seems to have been yes, at least for a long time, yet the method remains partly hidden. We can see the result more clearly than the mechanism. This is one of the strangest experiences in archaeology, the visible outcome of an invisible agreement. The city shows discipline, but not the full story of discipline. It shows planning, but not the planner. It shows standards, but not the council, priest, ruler, guild, family network, or ritual system that may have preserved them. To say there was no authority would be too confident. To say there was a king like those in other ancient lands would also be too confident. The honest position lies in between, in the uneasy space where evidence is strong enough to reveal order, but too incomplete to reveal its human face. That space is where the imagination must slow down. The first humans did not begin with institutions written on tablets. They began with bodies near other bodies, learning through repetition which actions could be trusted. A place near fire meant warmth. A remembered path meant water. A shared signal meant danger. A gesture, a glance, or a pattern of movement could carry meaning before any formal state existed. Over many thousands of years, these small forms of coordination grew more complex. They became traditions, rules, expectations, and eventually systems built into material life. In this city, something like that long transformation seems to have hardened into brick. The old human need for shared expectation appears not as myth, but as street layout. Not as a royal inscription, but as drainage. Not as a face carved in stone, but as repeated design across neighborhoods. This is why the missing center is not a minor detail. It forces us to question the stories we normally tell about civilization. We often imagine that order must come downward, from the top, from a throne, from a palace, from a single commanding will. Sometimes it does. Many societies have been shaped that way, but the ruins of this city leave open another possibility, that some kinds of order may grow outward through practice, habit, trade, craft, ritual, and shared standards until the whole place carries a structure that no single surviving object can explain. Perhaps there were leaders whose authority was real but not monumental. Perhaps there were powerful families whose signs have not survived in a way we recognize. Perhaps religious ideas held the city together without building the kind of temples we expect. Perhaps water, brick, measurement, and cleanliness were not merely practical matters, but expressions of a deeper social world. We do not need to pretend we know which answer is right. The uncertainty is part of the truth. What matters here is that the city refuses to be reduced to one easy explanation. It was not advanced because one great building survived. It was advanced because many quiet systems appear to have worked together. And when we look for the hand that arranged them, we find not a hand, but a pattern. For a sleep listener, this pattern can feel almost peaceful at first. Straight streets under warm dust, brick walls cooling after sunset, water moving where people wanted it to go. But beneath that calm is the deeper question of human history. How did a species that once survived by knowing small groups, local paths, and immediate dangers learn to create a shared order so large that the people inside it could live by rules they did not personally invent? In the silence where a king's name might have been, The city leaves us with that question, and the question is larger than any palace. A city without an obvious palace does not become a city without power. Power may simply become harder to see. It can live in food storage, in access to wells, in control over trade, in ritual knowledge, in family memory, in the right to measure, build, seal, count, or decide where a wall may stand. Power can move through a community without rising into one massive building. It can settle into customs so familiar that the people obeying them no longer experience them as commands. That possibility makes this city more mysterious, not less. If its order was not declared through giant royal monuments, then we have to look for authority in quieter places. We have to ask whether a brick can carry power, whether a street can preserve an agreement, whether a drain can reveal a shared discipline, whether a city can be governed partly by habits that feel ordinary to those who live inside them. For modern people, this is difficult because we are used to visible systems. We look for the office, the document, the title, the signature, the official centre. Ancient life often asks us to think differently. The things that mattered most may not have survived in recognizable form. A wooden platform disappears. A spoken rule disappears. A ritual obligation disappears. A council meeting leaves no easy trace. A song, oath, taboo, memory, or seasonal ceremony can organize human behavior for centuries and then vanish without leaving its grammar behind. What remains is the effect. Streets stay aligned. Bricks remain similar. Wells appear where life required them. Drains suggest repeated care. A city of bodies once moved through these arrangements and found them normal enough to continue. That is the haunting part. The people living there did not wake each morning thinking they were mysterious. They woke thirsty, tired, hungry, alert, perhaps worried about work, family, illness, weather, trade, or repairs. They walked through their city as a real place, not as a puzzle for later centuries. The order that amazes us may have been the background of their ordinary day. This brings the question back to the oldest human beginning. Before cities, before bricks, before seals and drains, human groups survived through shared attention. One person noticed tracks, another remembered fruiting trees, another carried fire, another watched a child. Cooperation did not begin as an institution. It began as a way for vulnerable bodies to remain alive together. Over long periods of time, that ability to coordinate became one of the great strengths of our species. But a city stretched that strength almost beyond recognition. It asked people to cooperate not only with those they knew, but with people beyond their household, beyond their lane, beyond their lifetime. A brickmaker might never meet the person who later lived safely behind the wall. A worker repairing a drain might never know all the households protected by that waterway. A rule about measurement might guide builders whose names were never remembered. This is where the city begins to feel advanced in a deeper sense. Its achievement was not only technical, it was a way of extending trust into matter. Human agreement became clay, human expectation became street, human cleanliness became drainage, human memory became habit built into the ground. Yet because the written voice of the city remains largely closed to us, we cannot easily follow these systems back to their inner meanings. We can see that something held, but not exactly how it held. We can see that people shared enough practical order to sustain urban life, but not whether that order came from rulers, councils, merchants, priests, kin groups, neighbourhoods, or a mixture of forces now lost. The honest answer is not a simple one. The evidence does not let us say that this was a perfect, equal, peaceful, or rulerless city. No ancient settlement should be turned into a dream just because its rulers are hard to find. There may have been inequality, conflict, coercion, and hierarchy in forms that have not survived clearly, but the ruins do allow another thought. Not all human complexity announces itself through domination carved in stone. Sometimes complexity survives as repetition, maintenance, and shared design. Sometimes the most revealing traces of a civilization are not the things meant to impress outsiders, but the things that kept insiders alive. By the time we leave this early layer of the mystery, the city has changed in our minds. It is no longer simply an advanced place with straight streets and clever drains. It is a question about how human beings organize life when the group becomes too large for everyone to know everyone else. It is a question about whether civilization always needs one visible center, or whether order can spread through 1,000 smaller acts until no single surviving object can explain the whole. And that may be why the missing palace, the missing king, and the missing voice matter so much. They do not make the city empty, they make it deeper. They leave us standing before a society whose intelligence is visible everywhere, while its command remains almost nowhere. To understand why this city still feels so advanced, we have to leave kings and monuments for a while and return to the body. Every civilization, however mysterious, had to answer the same quiet physical problems. People woke with thirst. They washed dust from their skin. They cooked, carried, cleaned, sweated, slept, became ill, healed, aged, and died. A city is never only an idea. It is a dense gathering of human bodies, and bodies create needs that cannot be ignored for long. When many people live close together, water becomes more than a gift from nature. It becomes a system. Clean water must arrive near the places where people live. Dirty water must leave before it damages the living space. If that movement fails, the city begins to turn inward against itself. Streets become foul. Houses become damp and unhealthy. Smell, insects, sickness, and discomfort move through the same closeness that once made trade and cooperation possible. This is why the water systems of this ancient city matter so much. They are not small technical details. They are evidence that people were thinking about daily survival at the scale of an entire urban world. In a small mobile group, the older human answer to waste and dirt was often distance. People could move camp. They could step away from sleeping places. Weather, soil, sunlight, animals, and open space could absorb much of what the body left behind. The landscape helped solve problems before those problems became concentrated. But city life changes the equation. It brings human needs into repeated contact with walls, floors, neighbours, stored food, narrow lanes, and shared wells. The old freedom of distance becomes limited. You cannot simply walk away from every problem when your house is built of brick, when your neighbours are close, when water must serve many hands, and when the same streets carry the same feet day after day. In that setting, cleanliness is not a luxury. It is a form of social intelligence. It is one way a city protects itself from the consequences of being a city. This is what makes the ancient drains, wells, bathing spaces, and water channels so powerful to imagine. They speak directly to the body. A person did not need a modern word for engineering to feel the difference between water close at hand and water far away. A family did not need germ theory to understand that stagnant filth near a living space was dangerous, unpleasant, and hard to endure. A builder did not need to write a theory of public health to recognize that water must be guided. The city seems to have built these recognitions into ordinary architecture. Brick surfaces, covered drains, bathing areas, and repeated wells suggest a place where the movement of water was not an afterthought. It was woven into the way people lived. That is remarkable because water is both simple and difficult. It flows downward, finds cracks, carries waste, weakens walls, feeds life, spreads sickness, cools skin, and returns with the seasons. The first human groups had always searched for water, but they did not always need to command it inside a fixed settlement. Here, water appears to have been brought into an agreement with human space. It entered the house, the courtyard, the bathing place, the street, and the drain. It had roots. It had edges. It had destinations. In a world without modern pipes, pumps, concrete networks, or chemical treatment, that should make us pause. The city's greatness was not only in what it displayed, but in what it quietly removed. Dirty water, daily disorder, and the pressure of too many bodies too close together. 4,500 years ago, human beings were not merely building upward for memory. They were building downward for survival, shaping the ground so that water, waste, and the human body could remain in the same city without immediate collapse. The more we follow the water, the more the city begins to feel different from many ancient places preserved in the imagination. Its intelligence does not stand only in the sunlight. It moves in shadows, under coverings, along brick-lined passages, beneath the level of ordinary footsteps. A person walking through the street may not have stopped to admire a drain, just as modern people rarely stop to admire the pipes beneath a road. But that is exactly why such systems matter. The most important parts of a settled life often become invisible when they work well. Water arrives, water leaves, the floor dries, the smell fades, the house remains livable, the street can be used again tomorrow. In a dense settlement, these quiet outcomes are not small. They are the difference between a city that can continue and a city that slowly fills with its own disorder. The older human body was shaped in open environments, where movement solved many problems. If a place became unpleasant, dangerous, polluted, or exhausted, people could often shift, follow another path, sleep somewhere else, or let the land recover behind them. But a brick city changes the relationship between body and landscape. The wall does not move when conditions worsen. The well cannot be casually abandoned if many people depend on it. A narrow lane cannot clean itself simply because a season has turned. When humans began to live in fixed places, they also began to inherit yesterday's problems. Yesterday's water, yesterday's refuse, yesterday's dampness, yesterday's repairs. A city is memory made physical, and not all memory is pleasant. For the people here, the answer seems to have been repeated management rather than escape. Water was not allowed to remain only a natural force. It was given channels, edges, surfaces, and directions. Dirty water could be led away from rooms. Bathing could be placed within domestic life. Wells could bring clean water near the people who needed it. None of this should be imagined as modern perfection. The city was still ancient. It still belonged to a world of heat, mud, insects, illness, flooding, labour, and uncertainty. Yet the repeated attention to water shows a kind of practical discipline that later cities did not always maintain so clearly. That is the unsettling comparison. Some later urban worlds became famous for monuments, armies, laws, and kings, while ordinary people still lived close to filth and unreliable water. Here, long before many familiar chapters of history, the ruins suggest that the movement of water through daily life had become a central concern. This does not mean the people understood disease in a modern scientific way. It means they understood experience. They knew what the body learned before writing. Bad water harms, stagnant waste troubles. A house, dampness weakens comfort, and closeness makes private habits public. Human beings had always learned from the body. Hunger taught timing, cold taught shelter, pain taught caution, thirst taught memory. In the city, those ancient lessons were enlarged into architecture. The body's needs were no longer answered only by individual skill. They were answered by shared design. A family's comfort depended on builders, brickmakers, water carriers, neighbours, and the unseen people who kept systems working. This is where the city's advanced quality becomes almost intimate. It is not advanced only because someone could plan a street. It is advanced because the settlement seems to have recognized that daily life breaks down from below. A civilization can survive without a giant statue longer than it can survive without usable water. It can lose a monument and still continue, but if waste remains too close to the sleeping place, if wells fail, if drainage stops, if houses become damp and foul, the body itself begins to resist the city. 4,500 years ago, in this place, people appear to have understood that a city must care for what touches the skin, enters the mouth, passes through the house, and leaves the body behind. What makes this attention to water especially haunting is that it feels both ancient and familiar at the same time. The people who lived there did not have modern bathrooms, modern medicine, modern pumps, or modern ideas about invisible microbes. Their world was made of clay, river water, brick, wood, heat, hands, animals, tools, seasons, and memory. Yet they seem to have understood a truth that every city must face. Human beings can gather in great numbers only if the most basic needs of the body are given a stable place. The mouth needs water, the skin needs washing, the house needs dryness, the street needs clearing. The waste of one day must not become the danger of the next. These are not glorious matters. They do not make songs as easily as kings, battles, or temples. But they are the hidden foundation of settled life. Without them, the grandest city becomes difficult to inhabit. This is why the city's drains, wells, and bathing spaces carry such quiet force. They remind us that civilization is not only the rise of power, it is also the reduction of exposure. For most of the human story, the body met the world directly. Rain fell on skin, smoke entered the eyes, cold entered the bones, thirst pulled people toward rivers, springs, and remembered pools. A bad sleeping place could be left behind. A dirty place could be avoided. A dangerous camp could be abandoned. Movement was part of survival. But in a city, movement becomes bounded. People return to the same rooms. They walk the same lanes. They share the same water sources. They depend on neighbors they may not know well. The city becomes a second environment, built by humans but still capable of harming them if it is badly made. To live inside it, people had to create a new kind of shelter, not only against weather, but against the side effects of their own closeness. That is the deeper meaning of the water systems. They are not merely proof that ancient builders were skilled. They show that the city had begun to think at the scale of repeated days. One clean morning was not enough. One cleared drain was not enough. One useful well was not enough. Urban life required maintenance, expectation, and return. The same problems came back with every meal, every bath, every heat-heavy afternoon, every rainy season, every crowded household. A system had to be reliable not once, but again and again. That repetition is where the city feels strangely advanced. It did not only solve a dramatic crisis, it reduced countless small frictions that would otherwise have worn down daily life. A person could wake and find water near. A household could wash without turning the interior into a permanent swamp. A street could remain a street rather than becoming a channel of neglect. A wall could stand because water had been given another path. These details may sound ordinary, but ordinary things are where most of human life actually happens. Our species did not become human only through rare moments of invention. It became human through the repeated care of fire, food, children, tools, shelter, memory, and water. The city extended that older care into brick and layout. It took lessons once held in small groups and spread them across a larger human world. The result was not a modern city, and it should not be forced into a modern fantasy. It was still vulnerable. It still faced the river, the climate, disease, labor, conflict, and time. But within its ruins we can see a serious attempt to make crowded life bearable. That attempt may be more impressive than a monument because it served the body before it served the eye. Many later people built taller, carved deeper, conquered farther, and wrote louder. Yet this city asks a quieter question. What if one of the clearest signs of advancement is not how high a civilization rises above the ground, but how carefully it protects the fragile human life moving across the ground each day? A city can impress the eye with water, streets, and drains, but the deeper question is how such order was repeated. One good drain could be luck. One straight wall could be the work of a careful builder. One well-placed street could be an isolated decision. But when similar choices appear again and again, across houses, lanes, platforms, and neighborhoods, the mystery changes shape. We are no longer looking only at skill, we are looking at shared measurement. We are looking at a society in which many hands seem to have followed patterns that were larger than any one hand. That is where the brick becomes important. A brick is easy to underestimate because it is small. It does not dominate the horizon. It does not speak like a statue or shine like metal. It lies underfoot, stacks into walls, disappears into corners, and becomes part of the background. Yet in a city like this, the brick may be one of the most revealing objects of all. To make bricks repeatedly, people need clay, water, shaping, drying, firing, transport, labor, and expectation. They need to know what size a brick should be, how it will fit with others, how it will bear weight, how it will turn a corner, how it will line a drain, how it will hold a floor, how it will survive weather and pressure. A brick is not only a material object, it is a small agreement hardened by fire. For early humans, this kind of agreement represented a major change in the way life was organized. In older mobile worlds, a useful object could be shaped for immediate need. A stone tool, a hide shelter, a wooden spear, a basket, a hearth, or a sleeping place belonged closely to the people using it. The scale was human in a direct sense. Knowledge passed through observation, touch, imitation, correction, and memory. But a city asked for another level of repetition. Materials had to work beyond the moment. They had to fit with other materials shaped by other people. A wall might be built by one group and repaired by another. A drain might be laid by hands that would never meet the households depending on it. A street might remain useful only if many later builders respected its line. The city could not rely on cleverness alone. It needed consistency. This is why standardized building practices feel so significant. They suggest not just intelligence, but continuity. They suggest that a person making one brick was participating in a larger pattern of city life. Perhaps the maker did not think of it in those words. Perhaps it was simply the way bricks were made, the way elders taught younger workers, the way craft knowledge travelled, the way a neighbourhood expected walls to stand. But that ordinary repetition is exactly what allowed the city to become more than separate acts of construction. It allowed individual labour to combine into an environment that felt coherent. The street and the wall could trust the brick. The builder could trust the measure. The household could trust the shape of the room. The city could grow without every piece needing to be invented again. This does not mean everything was planned from the beginning, in a single perfect design. Ancient cities often grew, changed, repaired, adapted, and replaced themselves through time. But even change can follow rules. Even repair can preserve an older rhythm. Even a rebuilt wall can carry the memory of a measurement first chosen long before the builder was born. That is the quiet power of standardization. It turns memory into form. It allows a society to keep thinking after individual thinkers are gone. And in this city, 4,500 years ago, that thought seems to rest in the baked brick itself. Small, silent, repeatable, and strong enough to make thousands of separate human actions feel like one continuous mind. The same logic that lives inside the brick also appears in the street. A street is easy to mistake for emptiness. It is not a wall, not a house, not a well, not an object one can hold in the hand. It is the space between things. Yet in a city, that space may be one of the most important inventions of all. A street tells bodies where to move. It tells carts, animals, workers, children, neighbours, strangers and visitors how to pass without turning every movement into conflict. It separates houses while connecting them. It allows water, goods, noise, dust, smell, and news to travel. When streets are arranged with care, they do more than help people walk. They teach the city how to behave. In this ancient place, the street pattern suggests that movement itself had been given shape. The lanes and larger roads were not merely the accidental gaps left after houses appeared. They seemed to belong to a broader habit of order, one that allowed the built environment to guide daily life. To understand why this matters, we have to return again to the older human condition. For most of our story, a path was made by use. People crossed open ground, followed riverbanks, climbed slopes, moved between trees, returned to camps, and carried the memory of routes in the body. A path could bend around danger, disappear under rain, shift with animals, or fade when the group moved away. The land itself remained open to change. But an urban street is different. Once walls rise along it, movement becomes fixed. Once houses face it, people begin to depend on it. Once drains run beside it or beneath it, the street becomes tied to water, waste, repair, and maintenance. It is no longer only a place to walk. It is a long agreement that must be preserved. This is why straightness, alignment, and repeated street logic are not small details. They show that the city was not simply growing like scattered huts around a water source. It was holding a pattern. That pattern may have changed across time, and it may not have been perfect, but its presence is still meaningful. A person stepping into such a street would have entered a human-made rhythm. Doorways opened in certain ways. Walls met lanes at certain angles. Drains followed certain lines. The body learned where to turn, where to avoid, where to gather, where to pass. Even without spoken instruction, the city instructed. This is one of the great changes of civilization. Human beings began to live inside spaces that silently shaped their choices. The hunter following a trail still had to read wind, mud, tracks, and sky. The farmer had to read soil, water, season, and seed. But the city dweller also had to read walls, corners, thresholds, neighbours, traffic, drains, and rules embedded in space. Intelligence did not disappear from the body. It was redirected. It became urban attention. It became the habit of moving through a designed environment. The roads of this city, therefore, tell us something deeper than where people walked. They show how cooperation can become spatial. A society does not need every person to understand the whole plan for the plan to affect everyone. A child can grow up following streets built before birth. A craft worker can carry goods along routes established by older generations. A household can repair its doorway while still respecting the lane outside. The individual life remains small, but the pattern around it becomes large. That is why the city feels so advanced without needing to look dramatic. Its order was not only in the objects it produced, but in the empty spaces it preserved. A street is a promise that others will not build anywhere they please. A lane is a promise that movement will remain possible tomorrow. A drain line is a promise that water will be guided away from living space. These promises may not have been written in words we can read, but they were written in brick, distance, direction, and habit. 4,500 years later, we can still sense them, because the city's emptiness was not empty at all. It was organized human trust turned into space. When brick and street are seen together, the city begins to look less like a collection of ruins and more like a pattern of shared thought. The brick gives the pattern substance. The street gives it direction. One belongs to touch, weight, heat, clay, and labor. The other belongs to movement, distance, passage, and social life. Together, they suggest that the city's order did not rest on one invention alone. It rested on the ability to make many small decisions agree with one another. That may sound simple, but it is one of the hardest things human beings have ever learned to do. A person can decide where to place a single door. A family can decide how to arrange one house. A craft worker can decide how to shape one object. But a city needs many decisions to remain compatible. A wall must not destroy a street. A drain must not ruin a neighbor's living space. A brick must fit the hand of the builder and the weight of the wall. A doorway must open into a world where other people are also moving, carrying, washing, repairing, and returning home. The achievement lies in this compatibility. It is not loud, but it is deep. Long before this city existed, human cooperation had been personal and immediate. People learned whom to trust by living near them, hunting with them, gathering with them, sharing danger and remembering faces. The body knew the group. The voice knew the group. The fire at night held the group within a small circle of light. In a city, the circle expanded beyond what any person could fully know. The builder did not know everyone who would pass the street. The brickmaker did not know every household that would depend on the wall. The person clearing a drain did not know every body protected by the water moving away. Yet their actions still had to fit together. This is where material order becomes a kind of social memory. The city remembered what individuals could not. It remembered through proportions, routes, repeated forms, and maintained spaces. It carried instructions without needing every instruction to be spoken again. A young worker could learn the proper way to shape, place, repair, and align things because the city itself was full of examples. The past surrounded the living. It stood in walls, ran along streets, and waited beneath the feet. That is what makes this ancient place so powerful to imagine. It shows a stage in human history when knowledge was no longer only carried in bodies or stories. It had begun to settle into the environment itself. The city became an external memory for the human group. Every baked brick was a stored decision. Every street line was a preserved expectation. Every repeated building practice was a quiet message from earlier hands to later hands. This does not make the city perfect or fully understandable. It does not tell us whether life there was peaceful, equal, harsh, crowded, or divided in ways we cannot easily see. It does not reveal every rule, belief, fear, or authority behind the pattern, but it does show that the people who built and maintained it had crossed an important threshold. They had learned to make cooperation visible without making all of its causes visible. They had turned human agreement into a place where others could live. In that sense, the city's advanced quality is not only technological, it is historical. It belongs to the long human movement from small remembered paths to shared built worlds. The same species that once followed animal tracks and seasonal water had begun making tracks of its own, permanent enough for children to inherit and strangers to follow. The same hands that once shaped tools for direct survival were now shaping environments that could guide entire populations. By the time we leave this layer of the city, the brick and the street have become more than evidence. They have become a question. How much of civilization is not one great mind giving orders, but many ordinary minds learning to repeat the same useful pattern until the pattern becomes stronger than any one person? The city did not rise in an empty world. It rose because water had already been shaping human life for longer than any wall, brick, or street. Before there were cities, before fields widened beside rivers, before people learned to store grain in large amounts, human beings had followed water with the oldest kind of attention. A spring could decide where a group rested. A riverbank could decide where children were carried. A dry season could decide whether people moved on or stayed a little longer. The human body is tied to water so completely that thirst can become stronger than memory, pride, or fear. This is why a city built near a great river is never simply built on land. It is built inside a relationship. The river feeds it, threatens it, marks its seasons, carries soil, shifts channels, opens routes, and sometimes takes back what people believed they had made permanent. To understand this ancient city, we have to imagine not only streets and houses, but the larger watery world around them. The river plain was not a quiet background, it was an active force. It could make the soil rich. It could bring trade and movement. It could support crops, animals, mud, reeds, boats, and settlement. But the same water that made life possible also carried uncertainty. Floods could rise, silt could gather, channels could change, walls could weaken, stored food could be threatened by dampness. Roads could be cut. A city of brick may look solid, but beside a river it is always negotiating with motion. That negotiation may be one reason the city became so careful about water inside its own spaces. The people who lived there were not inventing water management from an abstract idea. They were surrounded by a landscape where water decided the terms of survival. The older human world had taught this lesson in simpler ways. A group moving through open land could read signs of moisture in plants, animal tracks, clouds, valleys, and soil. Water was not merely a resource, it was a map. It told people where life gathered. In the river cities of the ancient world, that old lesson became larger and more fixed. People no longer followed water only with their feet. They began to hold it, guide it, cross it, drain it, and build beside it. This changed the human relationship with place. A river settlement asks people to trust a dangerous source of life. It asks them to remain near the thing that may also undo them. That is one of the quiet paradoxes beneath this city. Its order may have grown not because the environment was easy, but because it was demanding. In a dry or open landscape, distance can solve certain problems. In a river city, distance is harder to maintain. The water is close, the mud is close, the flood memory is close, the need for repair is close. A street, a drain, a platform, a wall, or a raised floor becomes part of a long conversation with the ground itself. The city's intelligence was therefore not only social, it was environmental. It was a way of listening to the river without being fully ruled by it. This does not mean the people controlled nature in the modern sense. No ancient city did. They remained vulnerable to seasons, disease, crop failure, erosion, and slow changes that may not have been visible in one lifetime. But the ruins suggest that they tried to make a stable human world beside an unstable natural one. That effort sits at the center of the mystery. 4,500 years ago, people built not simply a city of brick, but a city of water discipline, shaped by the same element that had guided human survival from the beginning. A river city lives with a strange kind of patience. It cannot forget the water, but it cannot fear it so completely that life stops. Each season returns with its own demands. Dryness asks for storage, memory, and careful use. Wetness asks for height, drainage, repair, and caution. A river does not obey the straight lines of streets. It moves by slope, sediment, flood, and time. It carries life in one moment and danger in another. For the people of this city, the river plain may have been both a promise and a warning. The soil could feed them. The channels could connect them to other settlements. The water could support crops, animals, craft, travel, and trade. Yet the same landscape could also shift beneath them slowly enough that no single generation understood the whole change. A city may seem permanent to the people born inside it, but a river remembers a longer clock. This is where the ancient setting becomes important. Human beings did not begin as masters of fixed places. For most of our history, survival depended on moving through conditions rather than forcing conditions to remain still. A group could follow herds, move toward fruit, seek shade, avoid floodplain mud, or return to a remembered water source when the season allowed. The body remained flexible because the world demanded flexibility, but agriculture and urban life asked for a different bargain. People began to plant, store, build, and return. They tied their future to specific ground. In doing so, they gained continuity, but they also accepted a new vulnerability. If the river changed, the city could not simply lift itself and walk away. Its wells, walls, drains, courtyards, and streets were bound to place. Its strength came from being settled. Its weakness came from the same fact. That is why water discipline mattered so deeply. A drain was not only a convenience, it was a small defense against the instability of the environment. A raised platform was not only architecture, it was an answer to damp ground, flood memory, or the need to separate human life from the moods of water. A brick wall was not only a boundary, it was clay transformed by fire, made harder because the world around it could soften and dissolve. Even the repeated care of surfaces may have reflected a city that knew how easily water could enter, stain, weaken, and carry away. To live there was to live inside a continuous negotiation between human order and natural movement. The city's advanced quality, then, may have come from humility as much as confidence. It did not erase the river, it worked around it, with it, against it, and beside it. It seems to have treated water as something that required roots, limits, and respect. That attitude reaches back to the beginning of human life. Long before anyone built a drain, our ancestors learned that the world could not be commanded by desire alone. Fire had to be tended, food had to be found before hunger became weakness, children had to be carried before they could walk, water had to be remembered before thirst became danger. The city enlarged these old lessons until they became urban habits. Instead of one person remembering where a pool remained after the rains, many people shared wells and managed flow. Instead of one camp moving away from mud, a settled community reshaped floors, streets, and drains. Instead of accepting the ground as it was, people slowly made a second ground, one more suitable for human bodies. Still, the river remained older than the city. It had shaped the plain before the bricks were fired, and it continued after the walls were abandoned. That thought softens the mystery without solving it. The city was not advanced because it stood outside nature. It was advanced because it recognized that human life could become more stable only by paying close attention to the forces that could undo it. In the end, every street and drain may have carried the same quiet message. A civilization beside water survives not by forgetting danger, but by building daily life around it. The city beside the river teaches a quieter lesson than a city built only to impress the eye. It suggests that advancement is not always the conquest of nature. Sometimes it is the careful acceptance that nature cannot be removed from human life. The river plain gave people soil, water, movement, and possibility, but it also kept reminding them that the ground was never fully theirs. Water could rise, channels could shift, mud could gather, brick could erode. A wall could stand for many years and still remain dependent on repair. A street could look firm and still belong to a landscape shaped by seasons. To live there was to build in a place where permanence was always conditional. That may be why the city's order feels so meaningful. It was not built in a world that promised stability. It was built in a world where stability had to be made again and again. This is close to the oldest human story. Our ancestors never lived outside nature. They survived by reading it, adapting to it, and accepting that the body was always exposed to forces larger than itself. Hunger came from outside and inside at once. Cold entered through skin. Thirst pulled thought toward water. Night changed the senses. Illness moved through the body without explanation. The first human groups could not command the world, but they could learn its patterns. They could remember where water returned. They could notice which plants followed rain. They could choose higher ground, tend fire, share food, and move before danger became too great. In this ancient city, those same old instincts appear in a new form. The group no longer moved as freely across the land. Instead, it made the land hold still just enough for urban life to continue. The city became a compromise between movement and settlement. Its drains admitted that water would come. Its wells admitted that thirst would return. Its brickwork admitted that mud and clay could be made stronger, but not immortal. Its streets admitted that many bodies needed predictable passage through a changing world. This may be one reason the city feels too advanced to explain easily. It did not simply stack materials into impressive shapes. It turned environmental pressure into ordinary design. The people who lived there seem to have understood that a city fails first in small ways: a blocked drain, a weakened wall, a muddy path, a contaminated water source, a floor that remains damp too long, a neighborhood that cannot repair what yesterday damaged. None of these things needs to look dramatic at first, but together they decide whether dense human life remains bearable. The advanced quality of the city lies in this attention to small continuities. It knew, in its material language, that survival was not one heroic act. It was maintenance. It was return. It was the repeated effort to keep water moving, walls standing, and bodies safe enough to wake again the next day. When we imagine the city at dusk, the river beyond it may be quiet for a while. The bricks hold the heat of the afternoon. A person walks back through a lane. Water has been carried, used, and guided away. Smoke rises from a house. Somewhere, a wall needs repair. Somewhere else, a drain must be cleared. The city is not frozen in perfection. It is alive through work. That is the part ruins can make us forget. What remains today looks still, but what made the place function was motion repeated across generations. Hands cleaned, lifted, shaped, carried, patched, and returned. Without those hands, the most advanced system becomes only an arrangement waiting to fail. So the city was not merely a city of water. It was a city of human attention directed toward water. It stood between the deep past of moving bodies and the later future of crowded civilizations. It reminds us that the first true urban intelligence may not have been the desire to dominate the earth, but the patience to live with it. One channel, one wall, one season, and one human day at a time. The easiest way to lose the city is to speak only about bricks, drains, streets, and rivers. Those things matter, but they were never alive by themselves. A city exists because people wake inside it. Before sunrise, before the heat rises from the baked walls, before the lanes fill with movement, the city begins again in the small needs of ordinary bodies. Someone opens a doorway. Someone lifts water from a well. Someone checks a jar, a tool, a wall, a sleeping child, a cooking place, a stored bundle, a crack in the floor. A person steps into a courtyard and feels the day before, understanding it. Dust, warmth, thirst, habit, and memory return together. This is where the mystery becomes more human. The city was not too advanced only because it had systems. It was too advanced because those systems seemed to have entered the rhythm of daily life. They were not distant machines controlled by strangers far away. They were close to the hand, the foot, the mouth, the skin, and the home. A well was not an abstract achievement. It was the difference between carrying water from far away and reaching it within the lived space of the city. A drain was not an impressive idea. It was the difference between a house that could dry and a house that slowly became unpleasant to inhabit. A street was not only a line on the ground. It was the route by which people met one another, avoided one another, traded, carried, repaired, and returned. To imagine the people there as distant shadows would make the city easier to admire but harder to understand. They were not symbols. They were human beings whose lives were shaped by the same ancient body we still carry. They had backs that tired, hands that hardened, skin that felt heat, stomachs that waited for food, eyes that adjusted to morning light, and memories tied to places. In the older human world, before large settlements, the body learned the landscape by moving through it. A person knew where water might be found because elders remembered it. A child learned the smell of smoke, the shape of useful plants, the danger of weather, the need to stay near others at night. Knowledge lived close to experience. In this city, that older human knowledge did not vanish. It changed location. It moved into walls, lanes, rooms, wells, and repeated routines. A child born there may have learned the world first, not as open ground, but as built space. The first remembered path may not have been through grass or scrubland, but from a sleeping place to a courtyard, from a courtyard to a lane, from a lane to a well, from a well back into the shade of home. That is a profound transformation. The human mind, shaped for landscapes, began growing inside human-made environments. The city became part of childhood, part of memory, part of what felt normal. This may be why ordinary people stand at the center of the mystery. A palace, if we had one, would make history easier to narrate. A king would give the city a face, but daily life gives the city its depth. The people who carried water, shaped bricks, cleaned spaces, repaired walls, traded goods, prepared food, and raised children were not background figures. They were the living tissue of the place. Without them, the systems we admire would have failed quickly. A drain is only advanced if people keep using and maintaining it. A street is only ordered if people continue respecting its space. A house is only durable if hands return to repair it. The city's intelligence may have depended less on one visible genius than on thousands of ordinary acts repeated with enough care to become civilization. That thought brings the city close again. 4,500 years ago, its greatness may have lived not only in what was built, but in the quiet fact that so many human lives could wake inside that built world and continue. A day in this city would not have felt like a mystery to the people living it. It would have felt like work, heat, thirst, habit, sound, and return. The morning may have begun with the body before it became thought. A person waking on a roof or inside a room would notice the air first, the change from night to day, the weight of sleep leaving slowly, the need for water, the presence of others nearby. The city did not begin as an idea in their minds. It began as a surface beneath the feet, a doorway, a wall, a familiar turn, a place where hands reach for the same objects again and again. This is important because ruins can make ancient life seem still. We see walls without voices, streets without footsteps, wells without hands. But the city's advancement depended on motion. It depended on people doing ordinary things in a shared space so often that the space remained alive. A well needed people to draw from it, but also people to keep it usable. A street needed feet, but also restraint, because every household could not simply expand into the path. A drain needed water to move through it, but also attention when mud, ash, refuse, or time slowed the flow. A house needed shelter, but also repair after heat, dampness, pressure, and use. The human body had always required care. What changed here was that care became urban. In older human groups, care was often direct and personal. Someone carried a child, someone shared food, someone remembered a safe place, someone stayed awake near fire, someone helped another walk. Survival passed through relationships that were close enough to see and hear. In this city, those older forms of care did not disappear, but they were joined by something wider. A person could benefit from a street planned before birth, a wall built by unknown hands, a drain repaired by someone outside the household, a brick standard learned from people no longer alive. The city extended care beyond the face-to-face circle. It allowed strangers and ancestors to shape the comfort of a morning. That may be one of the deepest changes in human history. People began to inherit not only stories and tools, but environments designed by collective habit. A child growing up there may have learned where water was before understanding why the well stood there. The child may have watched adults wash, carry, trade, sweep, mend, cook, and move along streets whose logic felt as natural as a river path once felt to earlier humans. The body adapted its attention to this built world. It learned corners, thresholds, shaded places, public spaces, private rooms, and the social meaning of distance. A lane could tell a person how close to come. A doorway could tell where one family's life began. A courtyard could hold tasks that did not belong fully to the street. These boundaries were not only physical, they shaped behavior. They helped many lives remain near one another without becoming one undivided confusion. That is why the people themselves are not a soft detail in the story. They are the reason the city worked at all. Every advanced feature was also a demand. The more organized the city became, the more maintenance it required. The more permanent the walls became, the less easily people could escape the consequences of neglect. The more many households depended on shared systems, the more each generation had to keep faith with patterns it did not invent. In that sense, ordinary people carried the city as surely as the bricks did. Their gestures kept the built world from becoming only abandoned material. Their routines turned planning into life. And when we imagine them walking through the heat of an ancient day, we are not only imagining the past, we are seeing one of the first great human experiments in living among strangers while still making the world feel known. The people who lived in this city were not only using an advanced place, they were becoming a different kind of human community inside it. That difference may seem quiet, but it reaches into the deepest parts of our history. For most of the human story, a person's world was small enough to be held in memory. Faces mattered. Voices mattered. The habits of the group mattered. Trust was built through repeated contact, shared danger, shared food, and the long knowledge of who had done what before. The body knew safety through nearness. A familiar person beside the fire was not an idea. It was warmth, warning, help, and memory in human form. In a city, that ancient circle did not vanish, but it widened until no single mind could hold all of it. A person could pass strangers in a lane, hear work from houses they did not enter, drink from a source used by people beyond their family, depend on repairs made by hands they would never recognize. This was a profound change. It meant human life had begun to rely on systems where trust was no longer only personal. It was built into repeated behavior, shared spaces, and inherited rules. The city itself became a kind of social body. Its streets were like paths of movement. Its wells were like points of thirst. Its drains were like channels of removal. Its houses were like cells of privacy held close together. No one person was the whole body, yet many people had to act as if the whole body mattered. This is one reason ordinary life in the city deserves careful attention. The people there were not simply living under architecture. They were practicing a new form of coexistence. Every day, they had to balance private need with shared space. A household needed its own rooms, but the street outside could not belong only to that household. A family needed water, but the well could not serve one family alone if others depended on it. A drain might begin near one house, but its usefulness belonged to many. A wall might mark separation, but it also helped create the order of the lane. The city trained people to live with boundaries, dependence, and restraint. These are not dramatic words, but without them crowded life becomes impossible. The older human body still carried its ancient instincts. To protect kin, to notice danger, to conserve energy, to seek food, water, warmth, shade, and sleep. But the city asked that body to move through a world made of strangers and rules. It asked people to trust patterns instead of only faces. It asked them to accept that some benefits came from systems they did not fully see. That is very close to the modern condition, and perhaps this is why the ruins feel so strangely familiar. We also wake inside, systems built by other hands. We also trust water to arrive, roads to remain open, walls to stand, waste to disappear, and strangers to follow certain shared expectations. The difference is that this city was doing something like that 4,500 years ago with clay, brick, labour, memory, and discipline. This does not make its people more modern than they were. They lived in their own world with beliefs, fears, inequalities, skills, and limits that we cannot fully recover. But it does make them deeply human in a way that simple labels cannot hold. They were not primitive figures waiting for civilization to arrive. They were already inside one of civilization's hardest experiments: how to make many ordinary lives fit together without losing the fragile needs of the body. When we leave the image of their daily life, we should not leave it as decoration. The water carrier, the brick maker, the child learning a lane, the person clearing a drain, the family returning to a courtyard at dusk. These are not small details beside the mystery. They are the mystery. A city becomes advanced only when ordinary people can wake inside it and find that the world around them has been arranged, repaired, and remembered well enough for life to continue. There is one more reason the city remains difficult to explain, and it is not buried in a street or hidden inside a drain. It is carried on small objects, pressed into seals, repeated in short signs, placed beside animals, shapes, and marks that seem to stand at the edge of language. The city did not leave us only brick and water, it left signs. And yet those signs do not open easily. They do not speak to us with the clarity of a long royal inscription. They do not unfold into stories of kings, battles, taxes, laws, prayers, or foundation myths that can be read line by line. They remain close, visible, and closed. This is one of the strangest kinds of silence. A completely silent civilization would be easier in one way. We would accept that its voice was gone. But here, the voice seems almost present. It is as if the city placed its fingers on clay, stone, or seal, and left marks that still face us across thousands of years, but the sound behind them has slipped away. The people who lived there may have used these signs in trade, ownership, identity, administration, ritual, memory, or meanings we cannot safely name. The honest truth is that we do not yet know enough to translate them into a living speech. That uncertainty changes everything. When we look at Egypt, Mesopotamia, or other ancient worlds whose writing can be read more fully, the past becomes crowded with names. We meet rulers, gods, workers, officials, merchants, scribes, and events. Even when the record is incomplete, language gives the ruins a human pulse. In this city, the pulse is harder to hear. The bricks remain. The streets remain. The drainage tells us about bodies and habits. But the inner voice of the society is still behind a door. We cannot easily ask what the city called itself. We cannot easily know what its people believed about death, purity, authority, river, animal, birth, or time. We cannot hear the names that mothers gave to children, the words used for water, the phrases spoken at a doorway, the rules whispered through generations. This matters because human beings did not begin as builders. They began as remembering animals, speaking animals, meaning-making animals. Long before cities, language helped small groups hold the world together. A word could warn of danger, a story could preserve a path, a name could bind a person to a group. A memory could travel farther than one lifetime when carried by speech. In a city, that human power of signs became even more important. More people meant more things to count, identify, exchange, protect, record, or symbolize. Marks could help memory extend beyond the body. A seal could stand where a person was absent. A symbol could carry identity through trade. A repeated sign could make a shared system feel stable. This is why the undeciphered signs are so haunting. They suggest that the city had another layer of order, one that may have linked objects, people, animals, goods, and ideas. But because we cannot read that layer clearly, the city remains both advanced and partly unreachable. Its material intelligence is visible everywhere, while its spoken intelligence stays hidden. We can walk through the street, imagine water moving through drains, feel the discipline of brick and layout, and still not know what words the people use to explain their own world. That is a deep kind of loss, not the dramatic loss of a collapsed wall, but the quieter loss of meaning. The city has not disappeared completely. It has left enough to disturb us. Yet the language of its inner life remains just beyond our hearing, like a calm voice speaking from the next room in a house whose door no longer opens. The signs left by this city are small, but they change the scale of the mystery. A large wall can tell us that people built. A drain can tell us that people managed water. A street can tell us that people shaped movement. But a sign suggests something more inward. It suggests that people were not only arranging space, they were arranging meaning. They had ways to mark objects, recognize identities, perhaps connect goods to owners, places to symbols, animals to ideas, and repeated forms to remembered rules. We have to speak carefully here, because the signs do not yet give us a clear voice. They may represent writing, or a system of symbols closely tied to administration, exchange, ritual, identity, or several of these at once. What matters for this city is not that we can confidently translate them. We cannot. What matters is that the people who lived there seem to have needed marks that could travel beyond the spoken moment. A spoken word disappears unless another person remembers it. A sign can remain after the speaker has left. That is a powerful step in human history. Long before cities, early humans carried meaning through bodies and voices. A gesture could warn, a track could be read, a story could hold a place in memory. A scar, ornament, tool shape, or repeated pattern could signal belonging. Human beings learned to make the world meaningful because survival required attention, memory, and trust. In a small group, many meanings could remain personal. People knew who made a tool, who owed food, who had seen danger, who remembered a path, who belonged near the fire. But a city expands the problem. When goods move beyond the household, when craft objects pass from hand to hand, when strangers meet in lanes or markets, when storage grows larger, when trade reaches other settlements, memory needs help. The human mind is strong, but it is not endless. Marks can extend memory into matter. A seal can say something when the person who pressed it is gone. A repeated sign can let an object carry a connection beyond the body that made or owned it. That possibility makes the city feel even more sophisticated because it suggests organization not only in brick and mortar, but in symbols. Yet the frustration remains. We can see the door of meaning but not walk fully through it. If these signs recorded names, we do not know the names. If they marked offices, we do not know the offices. If they carried sacred meanings, we cannot hear the prayers behind them. If they belong to trade, we cannot follow all the agreements they once protected. A seal with an animal and a row of marks may have been obvious to its maker, as clear as a signature, a label, a warning, or a sacred image. To us, it becomes a beautiful obstruction. It proves that meaning was there while refusing to surrender that meaning easily. This is a very different kind of loss from a broken wall. A broken wall can still show how it was built. A silent sign shows that someone intended to communicate, then leaves us outside the conversation. That silence affects everything we think about the city. It keeps us from turning the ruins into a simple story. We cannot safely say who held authority, what people called their gods, how they described purity, what they feared most, what they hoped would continue after death, or how they explained the river that fed and threatened them. The advanced city remains advanced, but its self-understanding is hidden. 4,500 years later, we can still see the intelligence of its streets, drains, wells, bricks, and seals. But the words that once made those things meaningful to the people living there have thinned into marks without sound. And so the city stands before us in a strange half-light, materially present, intellectually visible, yet spiritually and socially unfinished in our understanding. The silence of the signs leaves the city in a very unusual condition. It is not mute in the way an empty landscape is mute. It is not silent because nothing was said. It is silent because something was said, marked, repeated, and preserved, but not yet returned to speech. That is a different kind of distance. A wall can be measured, a street can be followed, a drain can be traced from one point to another. Even a broken house can suggest where people slept, worked, washed, cooked, and stored what they needed. But a sign belongs to the inner world of a society. It carries an intention that cannot be recovered by shape alone. We can see that someone meant something. We cannot yet hear what that meaning was. This is why the city remains so difficult to explain. Its material order is almost too clear, while its human voice is almost too faint. The result is a civilization that feels both close and unreachable. We know that people touched these objects. We know that symbols were pressed, repeated, and circulated. We know that marks mattered enough to be made with care. Yet we cannot fully enter the mental space where those marks were understood without effort. To the people who lived there, a seal may have been practical, ordinary, recognizable, perhaps even beautiful in a familiar way. It may have carried identity, authority, ownership, ritual meaning, trade meaning, or another kind of social signal that belonged to their world. To us, it becomes a small, closed door, and behind that door may be the answers to many questions the bricks cannot solve. What did they call the city? Did they think of it as one place, or as neighborhoods, families, crafts, and water systems joined together? What names did they give to the river, to animals, to purity, to danger, to the dead? Did they imagine power as descending from a ruler, rising from a group, flowing through ritual, or resting in customs so old that nobody needed to explain them? We cannot answer these questions with confidence. That restraint is not weakness. It is part of being honest with the past. Ancient people deserve more than our fantasies. They deserve the humility of uncertainty. Still, uncertainty does not make the city empty. It makes every surviving trace more precious. In the oldest human world, long before urban life, meaning lived mostly in the living, a path remained useful because someone remembered it. A warning mattered because someone spoke it. A story survived because someone repeated it. The human group was an archive made of bodies, voices, gestures, scars, ornaments, tools, and shared attention. In this city, meaning seems to have begun taking more durable forms. Marks could remain after the speaker walked away. A seal could travel farther than a voice. A repeated sign could hold a piece of social memory in matter. This was one of the long movements of human history, from memory carried only inside people toward memory placed outside the body. Yet here, the outside memory survived, while the key to it was lost. That is the haunting reversal. The signs endured longer than the voices that explained them. Clay and stone kept their shapes while sound disappeared. The city's people may once have spoken its meanings with ease, but time separated the marks from the mouths that gave them life. So we stand before a civilization that is not truly voiceless, but untranslated. Its streets tell us how bodies moved. Its drains tell us how water was guided. Its bricks tell us that standards were shared. Its signs tell us that thought reached beyond the immediate moment. But the full conversation is still missing. And perhaps that is why the city continues to hold us. It is advanced enough to feel intentional, organized enough to feel familiar, and silent enough to remind us how much of human intelligence can vanish while its traces remain in the palm of a hand. Many ancient civilizations taught us to look upward. They left mountains of stone, temple towers, carved kings, royal tombs, walls meant to frighten enemies, and monuments large enough to make later people feel small. Those remains are powerful, and they deserve respect. They show ambition, belief, organization, labor, fear, pride, and the human desire to speak across time, but they also shape our expectations. When we hear the word civilization, we often imagine height. We imagine something that rises above the landscape and announces itself. We imagine that greatness must be visible from far away. This ancient city asks us to lower our eyes. Its most meaningful achievements do not depend on one enormous object at the horizon. They are closer to the ground, closer to the house, closer to water, brick, street, and daily movement. That is why it can feel harder to explain. A pyramid tells us where to look. A palace tells us where power may have gathered. A giant statue gives the mind a face. But a well in a neighborhood, a drain under a street, a repeated brick, or a carefully organized lane does not dominate the imagination in the same way. It waits for slower attention. It asks us to notice that a civilization can be great not only because it raises something huge, but because it reduces the disorder of ordinary life. This difference matters because human beings often remember spectacle better than maintenance. We remember the stone that rises, not always the water that leaves. We remember the king's name, not always the unknown hands that kept a house dry. Yet for the body, maintenance is closer to survival than spectacle. The first humans did not live by monuments. They lived by repeated acts, finding water, tending fire, sharing food, watching children, repairing shelter, remembering danger, and moving before the land became too harsh. Human life was sustained by what returned each day. In this city, that older rhythm of repeated care seems to have become urban. The daily needs of many bodies were answered through built systems rather than only personal memory. This is a different kind of greatness. It does not erase the possibility of hierarchy, ritual, wealth, or power. No honest reading of the past should turn the city into a perfect dream, but it does suggest that our usual measures of advancement are incomplete. If we only search for giant monuments, we may miss civilizations that place their deepest effort into livability. A city that guides water well, organizes movement well, and gives households a stable relationship with streets and wells is not less impressive because it does not shout. It may be impressive because it learned to whisper through usefulness. The people who lived there may not have thought of themselves as building for distant admiration. They may have been solving problems close to the skin: thirst, dampness, heat, crowding, privacy, storage, and return. Their built world served the morning before it served memory, and perhaps that is why the city still unsettles us. It does not fit easily into the story that civilization becomes advanced when it becomes monumental. Here, advancement seems to appear in the quiet places where human life is made bearable. It appears in the unseen labor that lets a street remain open, a wall remain useful, a well remain reachable, and dirty water move away from where people sleep. 4,500 years later, the city reminds us that the most important architecture may not always be the one that makes us look up in awe. Sometimes it is the one beneath our feet, so ordinary that people only notice it after it has vanished. The idea of greatness changes when we stop looking only for height. A civilization can make itself known through towers, tombs, temples, and carved names, but it can also make itself known through the way people move through an ordinary day. A street that remains usable is a form of greatness. A well that brings water near many homes is a form of greatness. A drain that carries away what would otherwise poison the living space is a form of greatness. These things do not always impress the eye at first. They do not ask to be worshipped. They do not turn a ruler into a memory. Yet they touch the most constant layer of human life, the layer where the body meets the world again and again. This is why the ancient city becomes more interesting when we stop asking only where its monument is. We begin to ask a quieter question. What did its people decide was worth building into the ground? For early human beings, the most important things were often not large. A fire did not need to be monumental to save a night from cold. A shelter did not need to be beautiful to keep rain from the sleeping body. A remembered path did not need to be carved in stone to guide people toward water. A shared meal did not need to be recorded to keep a group alive. Much of human survival came from small, repeated, practical acts. In this city, that older human wisdom seems to have been scaled upward. The fire became the hearth and the cooking space. The path became the street. The remembered water source became the well. The habit of keeping waste away from sleeping places became drainage. The temporary shelter became the brick house. The deep continuity is not between ancient monuments and modern skylines. It is between the oldest human need for protection and the urban systems that made protection more stable. This is why comparing the city only to more monumental civilizations can mislead us. A pyramid, a ziggurat, or a palace shows a society's ability to gather labor toward a highly visible goal. That is one kind of coordination. But a city of wells, streets, houses, and drains shows another kind. It shows coordination spread through daily necessity. It asks not only whether people can obey one command for one massive project, but whether they can maintain many practical agreements over time. That second form of order may leave fewer dramatic images, yet it may be closer to the lives most people actually lived. The person drawing water did not need a towering monument to feel whether the city worked. The person cleaning a floor did not need a royal inscription to know whether dirty water had somewhere to go. The person carrying goods through a lane did not need a palace to understand whether movement remained possible. The body judged the city through use. This may be the most honest way to understand its advancement. It was not perfect, and it was not modern. It belonged to its own ancient world, with limits we should not romanticize, but it seems to have invested heavily in the ordinary conditions that allow people to remain in one place together. That investment tells us something about civilization itself. Perhaps civilization is not only the moment humans build things too large for one person to imagine. Perhaps it is also the moment humans begin protecting ordinary life from the pressures created by living together. The city's greatness may lie in that balance. It was not trying to escape the human body. It was built around the body's simple, repeated needs. And because of that, its quiet architecture can feel more intimate than a monument, as if the lost city is not asking us to admire power from a distance, but to notice how carefully people once tried to make life possible close to the ground. If the city teaches us anything, It is that greatness can be hidden in the places where life becomes easier to endure. A monument can survive because it was built to be remembered. A palace can survive because power gathered materials around itself. A tomb can survive because death was given stone, labour and ceremony. But a drain, a well, a street, a courtyard, or a brick wall belongs to a humbler kind of memory. It was not always made to impress distant generations. It was made so that someone could live, wash, pass, carry, repair, sleep and return. That is why this city challenges the way we measure the ancient world. It asks us to look for intelligence not only in what rose above people, but in what supported them quietly from below. For most of human history, survival depended on repeated care rather than grand display. The first human groups did not become strong because they built monuments. They became strong because they remembered water, protected fire, shared food, noticed danger, carried children, treated wounds, and learned how to remain together in difficult landscapes. Their world was not easy, but it taught them attention. The body could not ignore cold, thirst, hunger, pain, or distance. Those pressures shaped human cooperation long before cities existed. In this ancient city, that older cooperation did not disappear. It took a new form. The care once given around a small fire became care built into streets, wells, drains, and houses. The group became larger, the setting became fixed, and the need for shared order became more demanding. This may be why the absence of a giant monument does not make the city less important. It may make it more revealing. A monument can tell us what a society wanted to display. Ordinary infrastructure can tell us what a society had to sustain. One points toward memory and authority. The other points toward maintenance and life. Both matter, but they reveal different truths. In this city, the truth seems to rest close to the ground. It rests in the idea that thousands of people could live near one another, because countless practical details had been arranged with care. The road did not need to be sacred to matter. The well did not need to carry a king's name to change the day of a household. The drain did not need a carved inscription to protect a room from filth. Usefulness itself became a kind of achievement. That achievement is easy to overlook because it does not create a single dramatic image. It spreads itself across many small surfaces. It hides inside repetition. It appears in the fact that one brick fits another, one street meets another, one system serves many people, and one generation inherits the work of earlier hands. This is a quieter form of civilization, but not a smaller one. It may even be closer to what most human beings have always needed from the world. A little more safety, a little more predictability, a little less exposure to the forces that wear the body down. By the time we leave this thought, the city's lack of a pyramid no longer feels like a weakness. It feels like part of its strange identity. It did not speak through one mountain of stone. It spoke through the arrangement of daily life. It reminds us that a civilization can be advanced without being loud, organized without being fully understood, and great without leaving one obvious object for the eye to worship. 4,500 years later, that may be why the city still feels difficult to explain. It does not ask us to admire a single peak of human ambition. It asks us to notice the quieter intelligence of making many ordinary lives possible at the same time. When people hear that an ancient city disappeared, the mind often imagines a sudden ending. A wall falls, a fire spreads, an enemy arrives, a population runs. The last day becomes a picture, clear and dramatic, with one cause strong enough to explain everything. But many ancient cities did not end like that. Some faded through quieter processes, stretched across generations, until the people living through the change may not have known they were inside an ending. A drain not repaired, a street used less often, a house abandoned and then reused differently, a well no longer central to daily life, a neighborhood growing thinner, a craft tradition weakening, a trade connection becoming less reliable, a river shifting its promise. These are not scenes of instant collapse. They are the slow loosening of a world. This is important for understanding why the city remains difficult to explain. Its advancement is visible in the order it once held, but its decline does not appear to give us one simple answer that satisfies everything. The same city that seemed so disciplined, so carefully arranged around water, brick, and daily life, eventually lost the conditions that allowed that discipline to continue. That does not mean one disaster destroyed it in a single moment. It means the systems that made the city livable may have become harder to maintain over time. A city is not only built once, it must be kept alive. Streets need repair, drains need clearing, wells need continued use and protection, walls need attention, social habits need repetition, craft knowledge needs teaching. Trust needs renewal. If enough of these threads weaken, the city can remain physically present while its life slowly changes. This is one of the cold truths of civilization. The thing that looks solid from outside may depend on invisible maintenance from within. For most of human history, when a place became difficult, human groups could often move more easily than a city can. The older human body belonged to movement. People followed animals, seasons, water, plant growth, and safer ground. A camp could be left, a route could change, a shelter could be rebuilt somewhere else. But once people create a dense settlement of brick streets, wells, drains, storage, and houses, they gain stability at the cost of flexibility. The city becomes a promise, but also a weight. It holds memory, labor, and identity in one place. To leave it is not like leaving a sleeping place under branches. It means leaving systems, walls, neighbors, dead ancestors, familiar paths, and the accumulated work of generations. Yet even such places can become less able to support the people inside them. Environmental shifts, river changes, trade disruptions, disease, pressure on resources, or changes in surrounding settlements may not need to arrive as one violent blow. They can come slowly, unevenly, almost silently. The city may shrink before it disappears. Its meaning may change before its walls fall. Its people may move elsewhere, not as refugees from one final catastrophe, but as families responding to repeated difficulty. This kind of ending is harder for us because it offers no single image. It asks us to imagine decline as a series of ordinary decisions. Stay another season, repair one more wall, move to another neighborhood, send goods along a weaker route, use an old house for a new purpose, leave a street unmaintained because fewer feet pass there now. In such a process, civilization does not vanish like a lamp suddenly blown out. It dims room by room, and perhaps that is why this city's fate feels so haunting. The same quiet systems that once made it advanced may also show us how fragile advancement is. A drain is a sign of intelligence when it works. When maintenance stops, it becomes a reminder that intelligence must be renewed by living hands. A street is a sign of order when people keep moving through it. When those people leave, it becomes an empty line in dust. The city did not need to be destroyed in one terrible instant to be lost. It only needed enough of its daily continuities to break, until the place that once organized life could no longer hold life in the same way. A slow decline is difficult to see, because it can look like ordinary life. A family still wakes. Someone still carries water. A wall is still repaired, though perhaps not as carefully as before. A lane is still used, though fewer people pass through it. A drain still carries water, though more silt gathers than it once did. The city does not announce that it is weakening. It continues in smaller gestures. That is why the end of an ancient urban world can be more unsettling than a sudden disaster. A disaster gives the mind a boundary, before and after. Flame and ash, invasion and silence, but gradual change has no clean edge. It is made of years that still feel like years, seasons that still arrive, children who still grow, elders who still remember when things seemed better, and ordinary repairs that no longer keep pace with what is being lost. In this city, the systems that once made life feel stable may have depended on many conditions working together. Water had to remain useful, fields and trade routes had to support the population, craft knowledge had to continue, social trust had to be renewed, neighborhoods had to remain occupied enough for shared spaces to matter. If one thread weakened, the city could adapt. Human beings are good at adapting. That ability reaches back to the beginning of our species, when survival often meant changing behavior before conditions became fatal. But if many threads weakened across time, adaptation might slowly point away from the city rather than deeper into it. A household might move closer to better land. A trader might follow a more reliable route. A craft worker might take skill to another settlement. A family might stop repairing a house that no longer promised the same future. None of these choices needs to feel like the fall of a civilization while it is happening. Each one may feel practical. Each one may be small. Yet together, they can empty a city of its old meaning. This is one of the hardest truths about human history. People do not always abandon a place because they stop loving it. Sometimes they leave because the conditions that once made it livable have shifted beyond their strength to restore. A river changes its course. Rainfall patterns become less dependable. Farming becomes harder. Flooding or drying returns too often. Trade becomes uncertain. Disease or crowding alters confidence. Power, ritual, and social organization may change in ways that leave fewer people tied to the old center. We should be cautious here. No single cause should be forced onto the city as if it explains everything. The more honest picture is layered. Environmental pressure, economic change, social movement, and gradual urban decline may have interacted over time. The city's ending may have been less like a door closing and more like a fabric thinning. When fabric thins, no single thread can be blamed for the tear. Many small tensions gather until the whole surface can no longer hold. This image brings us back to the people inside the city. For them, decline may have appeared as inconvenience before it appeared as loss, a well becoming less useful, a street less maintained, a familiar house empty, a market smaller, a craft less common, a public habit less certain. The body notices such things quietly. It walks farther for water. It avoids a lane. It sleeps in a room that needs repair. It hears fewer voices in a place once full of movement. Civilization is often described in large words, but it is felt first in small changes to daily life. 4,500 years after this city flourished, its ruins remind us that advancement is never permanent by itself. It survives only while enough people, enough resources, enough trust, and enough environmental balance continue to meet each other day after day. The end of the city becomes more meaningful when we stop imagining it as a single broken day. A sudden destruction would be easier to remember. It would give the story a dramatic shape. But a slow fading asks for a different kind of attention. It asks us to notice how a place can remain standing while the life inside it changes. A wall may still cast shade after the household has gone. A street may still hold its line after fewer people pass along it. A drain may still exist after the hands that cleared it no longer return. The material city can outlive the living city. That is one of the quietest forms of loss. What disappears first may not be brick, but rhythm. Morning routines become thinner. Repairs become less regular. Shared spaces lose their certainty. A neighborhood no longer feels as necessary as it once did. The city does not die because every structure falls at once. It changes because the repeated actions that once renewed it begin to weaken. This is why the decline of such a place can teach us as much as its achievement. The same systems that made it advanced also made it dependent. A city of wells depends on people who keep water accessible. A city of drains depends on people who remove what blocks the flow. A city of brick depends on makers, carriers, repairers, and those who know the old standards. A city of streets depends on households that respect the spaces between them. When these acts continue, the city feels stable, almost natural. When they fail, the built world reveals how much care it always required. This truth reaches back to the oldest human condition. Before fixed cities, people survived through flexibility. They could shift camp, follow water, change paths, and let the landscape absorb what they left behind. Settlement gave humans new strength, but it also gathered risk into one place. The more people invested in permanence, the more they had to defend permanence against water, mud, heat, disease, hunger, conflict, and time. The city was a great answer to human vulnerability, but it was never a final answer. It had to be answered again each day. Perhaps the people who left did not think of themselves as abandoning history. They may have been following better fields, safer water, stronger ties, different trade, or simple family necessity. They may have carried memories of the old streets without imagining that later centuries would call their movement a decline. This is often how human history works. What becomes a collapse to archaeologists may have been a series of practical choices to those who lived through it. Leave one house, repair one less drain, move one household, change one route, teach one craft somewhere else. Over time, the pattern that once held thousands of lives begins to loosen. The city remains, but its meaning drains away. That image is softer than catastrophe, yet more disturbing. It means civilization can be lost not only by violence, but by the gradual failure of maintenance, environment, trust, and return. The city that once seemed too advanced to explain easily also became too fragile to continue forever. And in that contrast, we see something deeply human. We are a species that builds shelters against uncertainty, then must keep rebuilding the habits that make those shelters matter. 4,500 years later, the ruins do not simply ask why the city disappeared. They ask what holds any human world together when the hands that maintain it begin to let go. When we return to the city one last time, it no longer feels like a simple mystery of ancient engineering. It has become something wider and quieter. At first, the question seemed to be how people 4,500 years ago could build streets, drains, wells, brick houses, and organize neighborhoods with such discipline. But after walking through the ruins in thought, the deeper question is not only how they built, it is what their building reveals about human beings. This city does not explain itself through one obvious ruler, one giant monument, or one readable voice. It explains itself through arrangements that served life. Water brought near, waste guided away, streets kept open, houses repeated, bricks shaped to fit, daily movement given order. That kind of achievement is easy to miss because it is not dramatic. It does not stand above the city like a mountain. It lies beneath the feet, inside walls, beside wells, under streets and around the body. Yet it may be one of the most meaningful forms of human intelligence. From the beginning, humans were never the strongest animal, the fastest animal, or the most naturally protected animal. The body was vulnerable. Skin could tear, cold could enter, thirst could weaken thought. Hunger could shorten patience. A child needed care for a long time. A person alone was exposed. What made humans powerful was not one physical advantage, but the ability to remember, cooperate, teach, repair, and organize attention around shared needs. Around a fire, this meant keeping warmth alive through the night. Along a path, it meant remembering where water returned. In a shelter, it meant making a small space safer than the open world outside. In a city, those same ancient abilities became larger. The fire became domestic routine. The path became a street. The remembered water source became a well. The need to keep sleeping places clean became drainage. The care once carried by a small group became built into the form of a settlement. That is why the city matters beyond its age. It shows one moment in the long human movement, from direct survival to organized living. It does not show perfection. It does not prove that the society was equal, peaceful, or free of suffering. No ancient city should be made into a dream simply because parts of it impress us. Its people still lived with disease, labor, uncertainty, environmental pressure, and social limits we cannot fully see. But the ruins do show a serious attempt to make life less exposed. They show that thousands of people could live in a shared space where the needs of the body had been considered with unusual care. This is the educational value the city still carries. It reminds us that civilization should not be measured only by the height of its monuments or the names of its rulers. A society may also be judged by how well it protects ordinary life from avoidable disorder. Can people find water? Can waste leave the home? Can movement remain possible? Can one generation inherit useful patterns from another? Can strangers live near each other without every day becoming confusion? These questions may sound simple, but they sit at the foundation of every human city, ancient or modern. The city from 4,500 years ago feels too advanced to explain easily, because it answered many of these questions in brick, water, and space, while leaving so much of its inner voice hidden. It stands as a reminder that some of the deepest human achievements are not the loudest. They are the systems that make life steady enough for people to wake, work, wash, eat, care for one another, and return home again. The lesson becomes deeper when we compare this ancient city to our own ordinary comfort. Most modern people live inside systems they rarely see clearly. Water comes through a wall, waste leaves through hidden routes, streets are expected to remain open. Bricks, concrete, pipes, wires, drains, doors, locks, schedules, and rules hold daily life together before the mind even wakes fully. We call this normal because we inherited it. But normal is often just ancient effort made invisible by repetition. The city from 4,500 years ago reminds us that human comfort has never been natural in a simple sense. It has always been made. It has always depended on hands, memory, shared standards, repair, and trust. The ground beneath settled life is not only earth, it is cooperation hardened into material form. This thought returns us to the beginning of the human story. Our ancestors did not begin with cities. They began with exposed bodies moving through a world that did not promise safety. They learned to survive by paying attention together. One person could not hold everything. Someone remembered water. Someone watched the fire. Someone carried a child. Someone noticed danger in tracks, wind, smell, or silence. Human life became stronger when individual awareness became shared awareness. Over immense stretches of time, that ability to share attention grew into tools. Language, shelters, ritual, memory, farming, trade, and eventually urban life. The city was not a rejection of the old human body. It was an answer to it. The body still needed water, warmth, food, cleanliness, rest, and protection. What changed was the scale of the answer. Instead of one camp protecting one small group for one night, an entire built environment could protect thousands of routines across many years. Yet this larger answer brought its own danger. The more life depends on systems, the easier it is to forget that systems are fragile. A drain seems simple until it blocks. A well seems ordinary until it fails. A street seems permanent until it is abandoned. A shared standard seems natural until people stop teaching it. The ancient city shows both sides of civilization at once. It shows the brilliance of organized life, and it shows that organized life must be maintained. Nothing human stays advanced by itself. Every useful pattern has to be renewed by people who may not fully understand how much they have inherited. This is why the ruins still have value for a listener today. They do not merely satisfy curiosity about a vanished civilization. They make us more careful in how we think about progress. Progress is not only speed, height, size, wealth, or control. Progress can also mean reducing the daily suffering that comes from dirty water, unsafe shelter, broken movement, and social disorder. It can mean arranging life so that ordinary people do not spend every moment fighting the same ancient pressures of thirst, exposure, waste, and uncertainty. That kind of progress is quiet, but it is not small. It is close to the body, and because it is close to the body, it touches everyone. This ancient city may not give us all the answers we want. Its signs remain difficult to read. Its rulers, if it had rulers, remain unclear. Its beliefs do not speak plainly. Its decline does not fit one simple story, but its value does not depend on solving every mystery. Sometimes a ruin teaches by refusing to become simple. It asks us to stay humble before the past. It asks us not to confuse silence with emptiness. It asks us not to assume that people without readable voices lacked complexity. And it asks us to notice the quiet intelligence in ordinary things. Water guided away, a wall repaired, a path kept open, a household made livable, a city held together for one more day. The last thought the city leaves behind is not that ancient people were secretly modern. That would be too easy, and it would flatten their world into ours. They were not us wearing older clothing. They lived with their own rivers, seasons, beliefs, fears, tools, limits, and ways of understanding life that we cannot fully recover. The more honest lesson is quieter. Human intelligence has never appeared in only one form. It can appear as a poem, a tool, a law, a map, a fire kept alive, a child carried through hunger, a wall repaired before rain, a drain cleared before sickness, a road kept open because others will need it tomorrow. This city matters because it widens our idea of what intelligence can look like. It does not give us one shining answer. It gives us a pattern of care. It shows that 4,500 years ago, people were already facing the same deep problem that follows every human settlement: how to make vulnerable bodies live together without letting closeness become danger. That problem began long before cities. It began when early humans learned that survival was easier when attention was shared. The body alone was exposed. The group could remember more, carry more, watch more, repair more, and endure more. Over time, that shared attention became shelters, paths, tools, stories, fields, rituals, and finally cities. In this place, that ancient human ability seems to have become unusually disciplined. Water was not left only to chance. Movement was not left only to accident. Brick was not shaped without pattern. The needs of daily life were not treated as small matters beneath history. They became the city itself, and this may be the greatest value the ruins still offer. They remind us that civilization is not only what people build to be admired after death, it is also what people build so life can continue before death. A monument may help a ruler reach memory, but a well helps a household reach mourning. A statue may preserve a face, but a drain preserves the livability of a room. A palace may explain power, but a street explains trust between people who must pass one another again and again. These are humble truths, yet they are not weak truths. They are the foundation beneath every larger dream. When the city faded, it did not erase that lesson. If anything, its silence makes the lesson stronger. The unread signs remind us that much of human meaning can vanish. The missing ruler reminds us that power is not always preserved in ways we expect. The empty streets remind us that even the best systems need living hands. But the bricks, wells, drains, and lanes still say something. They say that human beings once made a place where ordinary life was organized with care. They say that advancement can be quiet. They say that the past is not a ladder leading simply toward us, but a landscape full of lost experiments in how to live. Some of those experiments failed. Some were abandoned. Some were transformed. Some left no voice we can hear. Yet each one belongs to the long story of a species trying to reduce fear, thirst, disorder, exposure, and uncertainty. So when we ask why this city was too advanced to explain easily, we should not search for a single magical answer. We should sit with the difficulty. The city was advanced because many kinds of intelligence met there: environmental attention, social trust, bodily care, repeated craft, shared memory, and patient maintenance. It is difficult to explain because the people who made those things meaningful are gone, and the signs that might speak for them remain closed. What remains is not an answer carved clearly into stone, but a quieter question left under the dust. How many other forms of human wisdom once existed, worked beautifully for a time, and then disappeared before we learned how to recognize them?